My name's Nick and this is Jonathan Chapman, and Jonathan and I work together at the University of Brighton on the three-dimensional design programme, but we also, as most academics, run research that we direct through something called the Inheritable Futures Laboratory, which is a sustainable design research group that, as I say, we coordinate together, that pulls in knowledge from across design practice and academia, trying to improve the kind of information that transfers between those two parties.
And I suppose as sustainable designers, the endeavour is to make things less damaging and to try and optimise something in terms of its contribution. I mean, because everything makes a contribution to the environment, and if we're talking specifically about the marine environment, then that's the same. The principle is the same, that everything you do has some kind of impact, and a sustainable designer's role is to try and develop as much knowledge and understanding of that impact as possible, and then find intervention points so that you can revisit the design of that system or that product or that experience and try and find ways of optimising it so as to reduce the originally identified impact that you kind of spotted.
But sustainability also brings design a new kind of purpose and something that's really vibrant and critical, which is really exciting. You know, design has perhaps been missing out on that for quite some time really, and it's been driven by lots of different agendas that maybe just appear to be surface or kind of whimsical, whereas sustainability gives it now a real kind of strong starting point at which to kind of reconsider the way we think about everything, you know, the things we enjoy, the things we want, we desire, the way things are made, how they should be made, why they should even be made in the first place, you know.
Just making a disposable razor out of recycled plastic doesn't mean it's good for the environment, and that idea is particularly apparent when you look at larger scales of production, like the type of scales of production that a company such as Gillette would work with. You know.
But by the same token, making a razor from plastic, if done correctly, doesn't necessarily have to be unsustainable either. And I think that's the key thing, is engaging with the critical debate, looking at those issues, you know, without discrimination really, and without just accepting the standard approaches to sustainable design, which came together very quickly and became, as we say, quite polarised and very opinionated. And people are very opinionated about sustainable design, and rightly so, but quite often what that does is shut down the discussion of the breadth and the sophistication of what the argument can have, and in giving people empowerment and ownership over their own creative thought processes, rather than following one dictatorial kind of journey with it really, which is is non-inclusive. So when considering plastic waste in the marine environment, there are some sort of really big damning statistics around, and I'm not generally a statistics person, but when you think about what they represent, they're starting to represent this kind of soup. And I think what's really concerns me in that kind of situation is the pure environment, and the perception of the oceans and the water being clean and pure is something that, you know, is iconic and something that you like to hold dear, and to consider that being a soup of plastic, of pollution, that is non-biodegradable is a really serious issue. But I guess when you talk specifically about plastics, there are lots of kind of different sort of dynamics that are set up when you place plastics as a material or as a designable resource, and then put that with the natural environment. And then obviously there are issues that arise. You know, the thing that kind of occurs to me when you think about the plastics industry is the idea of kind of virginity and freshness, which is something that plastics delivers. You know, this idea that an apple comes pre-wrapped in a spherical kind of its own little environment that the plastic creates to protect that object and keep it fresh. You know, and then how when you get your kind of new mobile phone, you know, you have all these bits of translucent material which you peel off, and all this packaging that you undo that gives you this kind of new object.
Ceremonial quality to
it. Indeed, which I think that's a really significant thing, because whilst we hold on to that as a notion, as buyers and as consumers and as designers of products to sell using those tactics, you know, those material tactics, then this issue is going to remain constant and increasing.
I mean, my thought would be that the question, how do you feel that plastic debris in the marine environment is a question that's so large. It's kind of a crippling question. It's like, well, I guess I feel bad about it, but at the same time, if we were to talk more generally about plastic debris, plastic waste in the world, I think the average consumer, the average designer, I dare say, would assume the surface land mass of the world. The image that jumps into the mind is kind of green belts and suburban areas with landfill sites and But the ocean is often not something we consider in that sense. I'm sure an environmental scientist would see it as at the top of the chain of command in a sense. But as a designer, we have such a land-based way of thinking, as most of our activity tends to be situated in that kind of region. The aquasphere is often neglected. But what's also interesting, I think, is that as landlubbers, we occupy the surface generally. But the marine environment is very much a three-dimensional environment, isn't it? Which has an X, Y, and a Z axis to it, and it's just a vastness that's so it's too vast to comprehend. It's like space, plastic waste in space. Equally, I can't really deal with that. But if we were to say, okay, let's go to let's talk about a specific aspect, specific kind of plastic waste in a particular type of marine environment. I think as designers we can definitely have that conversation. So if you're talking about, say, nets being cut off from trawlers because it's just easier, then sure, we can work that problem and we can talk about that and we can generate solutions which might actually reduce the impact of that. Or if we're talking about waste plastics that blow into rivers which then find a way into the ocean, we could probably talk about ways of reducing that as well. But when you talk generally about plastic waste in the ocean, it's too big, it's unwieldy.
I think Jonathan's point about the sort of identifying the different kind of
points of intervention.
Indeed, because I mean, if you find a big razor on a beach, that's very different from finding a car tyre or finding a component from a motor vehicle compared to finding parts of netting and things like that. They're all individual issues that kind of draw together and en masse, in a global sense, these things are really significant issues. But I think the designer is only really capable of dealing with those issues one at a time, really, as a means to make an impact further down the line. I think to challenge designers with solving that global issue it's never going to happen. Design can contribute to giving people the choices to make, but these issues need to be seen in isolation and build up a picture that where the cultural circumstances that this object is designed understands its duties. The person who's picking up that product from the shelf understands its duties as the same way as the designer and the manufacturer and the person who produces the material that it's made from, and so on and so forth. And that chain of command is very important for that one object to prevent it from causing an issue down the line in the system, in the ecological system of an ocean. But for designers just to deal with the global issue of carrier bags, flip-flops, bits of cars, it's monumental, and it's symptomatic of a whole cultural issue, not just one single design strategy.
But that's what good design does. It starts to disassemble and unpack very big issues and turn them into a collection of individual issues which can be managed correctly. And I think when design is at its absolutely best is when it does that, but it does it with specialists in that particular area. So for example, a marine biologist, environmental scientist and a team of designers working on these problems that you're bringing to it is exactly the way I think that this situation could be advanced and worked on. I mean, what's interesting is you're assembling here kind of discipline-specific pieces of knowledge and insight, and I think when you put this all together, you can start to craft what you might call actually a manifesto, a kind of call to arms, if you like. And I think what would be very useful is following that call. If individuals such as us, groups such as us, are given the opportunity to rise to that and to start networking with the groups you've identified to actually bring about real change.